2 months. Exactly 2 months after El Mencho bled out in an army helicopter over the Sierra del Tigre, the man who watched his back, organized his schedule, purchased his weapons, supervised his private hospitals, and had promised to claim his throne, was taken down in handcuffs on a hillside in Nayarit without firing a single shot. His name is Audius Flores Silva. 45 years old, born in Huetamo, Michoacán, the same state that produced El Mencho, the same tierra caliente that grows avocados, limes, and, apparently, a disproportionate number of international-level drug traffickers. The world knew him as El Jardinero, the gardener, and the nickname has nothing to do with any love of horticulture. It comes from a dark joke that circulated inside the CJNG. They say he's killed so many people and turned them into fertilizer that every place he sets foot becomes his garden. That tells you exactly what kind of man Audius Flores Silva was before the special forces of the Secretariat of the Navy pulled him out of the Nayarit brush with his hands behind his head. The capture was confirmed today, Monday, April 27, 2026, by Omar Garcia Harfuch, Secretary of Security and Citizen Protection. After 19 months of surveillance, field and cabinet intelligence work, and information sharing with U.S. agencies, authorities obtained knowledge of the target's possible location in the vicinity of the community of El Mirador, Nayarit. 19 months tracking a man who had survived 2 prior detentions, a massive Navy operation in Zapopan, and decades of living with a bounty on his head. It all came to a head this morning in a community called El Mirador, the Lookout, in Nayarit. An appropriate name, honestly, for the place where you finally get spotted after hiding for so long. The U.S. government had offered a $5 million reward for him. Not the 15 that hung over El Mencho, but $5 million is still enough for someone in your inner circle to start doing the math. And in the cartel world, when someone starts doing the math, they always end up talking. But to understand why this matters, you have to understand who this man really was. Because the gardener was not a media-friendly leader. He wasn't the type who appears in threatening videos with banda music playing in the background. He was exactly the opposite. The invisible operator, the one who keeps the machinery running while the boss makes the decisions. And in that role, he built something that no blurry DEA photograph could adequately capture. Audius Flores Silva was born on November 19, 1980, in Huetamo, Michoacán. Pure tierra caliente. If there is one region in Mexico that functions as an incubator for organized crime, for historical, geographical, and economic reasons, it's that one. Inaccessible mountain ranges, structural poverty, a state presence that amounts to little more than decoration. The kind of place where an ambitious kid with no realistic legal options ends up making decisions that will follow him for the rest of his life. Flores Silva made those decisions during the early 2000s when he began connecting with criminal structures in western Mexico. Nobody knows exactly when or how he crossed the line from minor operator to heavyweight figure. What we do know is that at some point in the process, he entered El Mencho's orbit, and that encounter changed everything. Born in Huetamo, Audius Flores Silva served as the head of security for the now eliminated CJNG leader, Nemesio Oseguera, El Mencho, before eventually taking charge of the state of Nayarit as the person responsible for the production and trafficking of synthetic drugs into the United States. That job, in the context of the CJNG, is not what you picture when you hear the word security. It's not a suited bodyguard standing in front of a door. It's the man who designs the protocols governing the boss's movements, the one who decides when he moves, which routes he takes, how large his escort is, which safe houses are used, and when to abandon them. He's the one who sleeps less than anyone else because his job is to make sure the person he's protecting never sleeps poorly. In the CJNG, where El Mencho had spent years building a legendary operational paranoia, never 2 nights in the same place, 0 digital footprint, multiple body doubles in different states. That job was of monumental complexity. And the gardener did it well. So well that El Mencho came to trust him with something beyond personal security. He trusted him with his hospitals. According to the Secretariat of National Defense, his duties within the CJNG ranged from overseeing the construction of private hospitals for El Mencho's discreet medical care to purchasing heavy weaponry from suppliers in the United States and Europe. Facilities where the most wanted drug lord in the hemisphere could receive medical treatment without appearing in any official record. Think about that for a second. We're not talking about taking your boss to a public clinic under a fake name. We're talking about building parallel medical infrastructure. That requires logistics, money, contacts within the healthcare system, and an organizational capacity that goes far beyond what the average bodyguard brings to the table. But the gardener's responsibilities didn't stop there. He also managed the purchase of heavy weaponry from international suppliers. That's not walking into a gun shop in Texas with a fake ID. That's negotiating with military hardware traffickers, managing financial transfers that don't trigger flags in monitoring systems, and coordinating the cross-border transport of equipment that, in many cases, would classify as military grade. The CJNG that shot down a Cougar helicopter belonging to the Air Force with an RPG in 2015 had that weapon because someone sourced it. Audia's Flores Silva was part of that someone. Over time, his responsibilities scaled well beyond personal security. The U.S. Department of the Treasury sanctioned Audias Flores in April 2021, identifying him as one of the CJNG's regional commanders. Flores Silva controlled clandestine laboratories in the central region of Jalisco and in southern Zacatecas, used to produce methamphetamine and other illicit drugs. The gardener was also linked to the control of clandestine airstrips, as well as small aircraft, cargo vehicles, and passenger units used to traffic cocaine, heroin, and other drugs from Central America into Mexico. Once inside Mexican territory, the substances were distributed among cells in the United States, in places like California, Texas, Illinois, Georgia, Washington, and Virginia. $5 million in reward money is not offered for someone who just carries bags. And then there's Puerto Vallarta. Journalist Raimundo Riva Palacio noted in his column that the gardener was the number 2 man at the helm of the CJNG, describing him as the lord and master of Puerto Vallarta, the epicenter of the violence unleashed across a third of the country in response to El Mencho's elimination. That's not a metaphor. It's a functional description of territorial control. Puerto Vallarta is an internationally renowned tourist city with an airport, a constant flow of foreigners, 5-star hotels, upscale restaurants, and, apparently, a parallel criminal structure that the gardener supervised from the shadows while Canadian tourists took selfies in front of the boardwalk. Speaking of tourists, because the gardener also ran a side operation that deserves special mention for its sheer monumental audacity. The U.S. Department of the Treasury sanctioned Audias Flores Silva for leading a timeshare fraud network in the state of Nayarit. Authorities discovered that the CJNG obtained victim information through accomplices inside tourist resorts, who then contacted victims by phone or email, posing as agents, lawyers, or sales representatives. The targets were attended to by people fluent in English, pretending to represent U.S.-based companies in the timeshare, travel, real estate, or financial services sectors. The agents asked for fees or taxes to be paid up front before receiving the promised money, which never came. The most powerful cartel in the Americas, running call center scams on retired Americans. That, my friend, is income diversification in its most cynical form. The alias Mata Jefes, Boss Killer, another of his many nicknames, is equally far from decorative. Authorities linked the gardener as the alleged mastermind behind an ambush in Teocaltiche, Jalisco, targeting a military convoy, in which at least 3 members of the armed forces were killed and several others wounded. He wasn't the type who issued orders from behind a desk while remaining detached from what happened in the field. He was the type who designed the operations that resulted in military casualties. And there was something else that made him extraordinarily valuable on the current criminal map. He was the bridge between the CJNG and the Chapitos. For decades, the CJNG and the Sinaloa cartel were mortal enemies, fighting over territory in Colima, Durango, and a dozen states in between. In 2025, Milenio revealed that the gardener was a key piece in uniting the Chapitos with El Mencho, leaders who until 5 years ago were enemies. The gardener organized a first meeting between representatives of Ivan Arquivaldo and Oseguera Cervantes at a ranch in Huajicori, Nayarit, neutral territory for both sides. A narco with enough credibility and diplomatic skill to seat at the same table 2 organizations that had spent years massacring one another. That's a profile that goes well beyond an upgraded bodyguard. What makes it all the more remarkable is that this man had already been taken down twice before and survived both times. Information from U.S. authorities establishes that Audias Flores Silva had previously been imprisoned in that country, where he served a 5-year sentence after being convicted of drug trafficking. After regaining his freedom, the gardener returned to Mexico and, in 2016, was arrested for his role in organizing an ambush against Mexican police officers in Soyatlan, Jalisco. He was released through legal proceedings. In November 2023, he escaped from a massive Navy operation in Zapopan, Jalisco, while his gunmen ambushed naval personnel. 3 opportunities for the system to hold him. 3 times the system failed, or was helped to fail. And during all that time, the gardener kept climbing within the structure until he reached where he reached. Then, El Mencho died in February. And the CJNG was left without a visible leader, with several operators positioning themselves for succession, each with enough firepower to make their candidacy stick by force. The gardener was the frontrunner in many analyses. He was the recognized number 2, the founder's most trusted man, the one who knew the routes, the international contacts, the hideouts, the security protocols. He had everything needed to assume command, except that the government had been tracking him for 19 months with exactly that goal in mind. When El Mencho fell, Mexican and U.S. intelligence knew that the next most valuable target would be whoever tried to pick up the pieces. And the gardener, by moving to consolidate his position after his boss's death, exposed his location. Today, at El Mirador, Nayarit, the Navy's Special Forces located him in the brush and detained him without an exchange of gunfire. No action movie finale, no cinematic chase, no last words for the history books. The man who for decades had ensured that no one could touch El Mencho ended up being dragged out of the hillside with his hands behind his head, exactly like any minor criminal who has nobody covering his back. Ironic, considering what his specialty was. Following the capture, violent incidents were reported at several points across Nayarit. In Tecuala, fires were reported at businesses alongside bursts of gunfire. The same script as February, executed with less intensity because this time it was a capture, not a death, and because the CJNG no longer has the same cohesion, it had when El Mencho was issuing orders from his mountain refuge. Authorities also captured El Güero Conta, identified as the gardener's alleged financial operator, hours after the main arrest. The intelligence that led to the primary target was enough to begin dismantling part of the immediate structure as well. Garcia Harfuch confirmed that the detainee will be prosecuted in Mexico and that the United States has already initiated extradition proceedings. With an arrest warrant from the District Court of Washington dating back to August 2020, charges for conspiracy to distribute cocaine and heroin for importation into U.S. territory, and a prior sentence already served in an American prison, the gardener has all the conditions in place to end up in a federal cell somewhere in the north, a state he never set foot in. Alongside the Chapitos, alongside El Mayo, alongside the endless list of Mexican capos who discovered too late that U.S. federal courts don't negotiate. What remains now is the question that always remains. What does this actually change? The honest answer is something, but not enough. The CJNG keeps operating. The roots remain active. The laboratories in Jalisco and Zacatecas have technicians who know what they're doing regardless of who signs the payroll. The cells in California, Texas, and Illinois are not going to shut down because their regional supplier was caught. Organized crime at this scale has the same property that El Mencho deliberately engineered into it. It operates without dependence on personal leadership. Still in play on the board, among the possible successors within the cartel's structure, are Juan Carlos Valencia Gonzalez, known as El 03, and Ricardo Ruiz Velasco. Then there's the entire layer of mid-level commanders that the gardener oversaw, who now face the same decision he faced when El Mencho fell: adapt, hide, or try to climb. Every one of those operators is running the numbers right now. Some are going to make violent choices. The disputes coming down the line will not be resolved in a boardroom. And while that internal dispute plays out, the Sinaloa cartel, still at war with itself following El Mayo's capture last year, will attempt to exploit any regional weakening of the CJNG to reclaim lost territory. The geometry of Mexican organized crime works this way. Wherever there's a vacuum, there is someone willing to fill it with their own blood and everyone else's. The gardener spent decades keeping the machine running from the inside. He knew every gear, every escape route, every bought official, every international contact. That knowledge is now available to the U.S. prosecutors who will sit across from him in an interrogation room. And that, depending on how much he chooses to say and what terms his defense negotiates, could be more damaging to the CJNG than any military operation. Or he might not talk. He might calculate the talking has consequences for the family he left behind. He might bet that his lawyers can find enough procedural technicalities to drag the process out for years. He might do exactly what he's done before: survive the system one way or another and resurface when no one expects it. The problem with that calculation is that this time there's no boss waiting for him on the other side. There's no El Mencho to bring him back into the structure when he gets out. The world he knew disappeared in a helicopter over Tapalpa 2 months ago, and whatever comes next will be built by someone else, on top of its ruins, without him. The garden has no gardener anymore. Whatever germinates now in that soil, no one controls it yet. And in Mexican organized crime, when no one controls the soil, what grows is always the most violent thing of all.